The gunshot echoed through the abandoned warehouse. In that split second, Elena Cross didn't think she moved, throwing herself between Damian Hale and the bullet meant for him. She felt the fiery explosion of pain in her shoulder. The world blurred. The ground rushed up to meet her, and through the ringing in her ears, she heard his broken voice, raw with fear. "Stay with me, Elena, please, stay with me." In a world built on contracts and betrayal, it had never been part of the plan to risk everything for a man who had once been her captor, to find love in the wreckage of revenge. But sometimes the heart chooses for us, and sometimes the most unexpected arrangements lead to the most beautiful beginnings. If you are ready for a story of second chances, broken hearts mended by love, and a mansion made of glass but filled with light, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Let's step into the story together. The chill of the marble table crept into Elena Cross's palms, rooting her in place as if the cold alone could steady her shaking heart. Across the table, Damian Hale sat unmoving, his gaze sharp and merciless. Without a word, he nudged a heavy folder toward her, a single gesture. But it weighed more than 1,000 spoken threats. "Sign it," he said, his voice slicing through the thick silence like a blade. Elena lowered her eyes to the contract, her chest tightening. "You cannot be serious," she whispered. "Marriage over a debt." Damian leaned back in his chair, the expensive cut of his black suit only sharpening his imposing figure. "I do not play games, Miss Cross," he said, calm and cold. "Your father staked your name against a loan he had no intention of repaying. The law sees no difference between his hand and yours." Only 12 hours ago, Elena had been in her small Sunnyside apartment, correcting art history papers and sipping cheap coffee. Now she sat in a room of steel and stone, across from a man known for turning rivals into dust. "My father is sick," she said hoarsely. "He would never—" Damian's hollow laugh stopped her. Thomas Cross knew exactly what he was doing, he said, sliding open the folder. Inside, damning proof, forged documents carrying her signature. Photographs of her father entering Hale Corporation again and again, weaving a web she had never seen until now. "But why marriage?" she managed to ask. Voice unsteady. "You could have taken our house, our lives. Why this?" Damian rose slowly, his silhouette framed by the vast glass windows behind him. Beyond, New York glittered like a cold, merciless sea. "I do not need your father's crumbling assets," he said, his tone almost bored. "I need a story the world will believe. 3 scandals in 1 year. My reputation needs more than lawyers to recover. It needs a fairy tale." What he did not say, what Elena could not know, was that her father's name had tangled itself in darker shadows, whispers of a death that Damian had never stopped questioning. He turned back to her. "1 year," he said simply. "You live under my roof. Smile at the right moments. Stand by my side. In return, I will erase your father's debts, guarantee his care, and grant you freedom with a generous settlement." Her phone buzzed against her thigh. A message from St. Agnes Hospital. Her father's condition had worsened. The walls seemed to close in. How could she choose between her father's life and her own freedom? "And if I refuse?" she asked, already fearing the answer. Damian's mouth curled slightly, a cruel mimic of a smile. "Your father is charged. The prison system will not be kind to a sick man. You will lose your apartment, your reputation, your future." From the corner of the room, Miles Turner, Damian's trusted lawyer, shifted uncomfortably. Perhaps Miss Cross would appreciate a moment to think. "There is nothing to think about," Damian interrupted sharply. "I am offering more than most would." Elena rose to her feet. Her simple linen dress, so ordinary this morning, now felt like rags in a courtroom. "You are not offering a choice," she said quietly. Damian met her gaze without blinking. "We always have choices," he replied. "Some are just harder to live with." Miles stepped closer, placing another document in front of her, a provision full coverage of her father's treatment at St. Agnes. Effective immediately. Elena skimmed the contract, her hands trembling. Behavioral clauses, public appearances, an entire year of living a lie, a smile pinned to her face like armor. At the end, a check was clipped to the page, $250,000, enough to buy back time her father no longer had. A pen slid across the table toward her. "Your pride or his life," Damian said softly. "Choose." The weight of the room pressed down on her. Her chest tightened, and her vision blurred, finally, with fingers stiff from fear. Elena picked up the pen. "You will regret this, Damian Hale," she whispered, not knowing whether it was a warning or a prayer. For a fleeting moment, something flickered in his cold gaze, something human, something broken. "I rarely regret anything, Miss Cross." And as her signature bled onto the page, Elena knew whatever life she had before ended here, beneath the silent, watching eyes of a man who saw her not as a person, but as a means to an end. Damian Hale's voice carried no hint of mercy. "I am being generous. Most men in my position would have pressed charges without hesitation." Elena Cross struggled to steady herself, rising on trembling legs. Her simple cotton dress clung to her awkwardly, a painful reminder that she did not belong in this gleaming world of marble floors, tailored suits, and ruthless power. "You are not giving me a real choice," she said, the words barely escaping her tight throat. Damian only lifted an eyebrow. "We always have choices, Miss Cross. Some are simply harder to live with." From the shadows, Miles Turner stepped forward, offering a smile so thin it barely masked the sharpness in his eyes. "The contract also guarantees your father's care at St. Agnes Hospital, the finest in New York." Elena turned her gaze back to the thick document lying before her. A trap dressed up in legal language. Page after page dictated the rules of this arrangement: how she would dress, where she would stand, what she would say, even how she would pretend in public to be the devoted wife of a man who barely concealed his contempt. Her stomach churned. "May I at least read it first?" she asked, her voice quiet. Damian checked the time on his sleek Philippe wristwatch, the motion casual but sharp. "You have 15 minutes, he said. "After that, the offer disappears." Elena's fingers turned the pages, each clause sinking her further into despair. There were sections about acceptable clothing, approved social behaviors, even the distance she should maintain from him during public events to project intimacy. Every detail engineered, nothing left to chance. When she reached the final page, her breath caught. A check clipped neatly to the signature line for $250,000. Damian noticed the flicker of shock in her eyes. "Consider it a signing bonus," he said lightly. "Your father's treatments will not come cheap." Elena felt the walls of the boardroom closing in. If she signed, she would be giving herself to a life built on lies. If she refused, she would be condemning her father to prison. And worse, Damian extended a Mont Blanc pen across the table, his hand steady. "Your father's life, or a temporary inconvenience for you. A simple decision. Really." Elena stared at the pen as if it might bite her. Then, with a hand so unsteady it almost betrayed her, she reached out and took it. "You will regret this, Mr. Hale," she said, barely above a whisper, for the briefest moment. Something stirred in Damian's eyes, a flicker of something real, almost amused. I rarely regret anything, Miss Cross. The pen felt heavier than stone as she pressed it to the paper, scrawling her name, signing away her freedom, her dignity, her future. Damian took the contract before the ink had even dried. We leave for Fairhill in 1 hour. Bring only what you truly need. Everything else will be provided. Without another word, Damian and Miles turned and walked away, the heavy door swinging shut behind them, left alone. Elena stood frozen, the finality of what she had done sinking into her bones. She had sold herself for love, not love of a man, but of a father who might never know the price she had paid. And she had no idea that the man who now owned her presence was hiding wounds far deeper than his cold gaze ever showed, wounds that her existence would soon bring to the surface. Whether either of them wanted it or not, the helicopter descended slowly, slicing through the dusk as the estate came into view. Through the curved glass window, Elena saw it not a home, but a sculpture of steel and glass, gleaming among the vast woods of Fairhill. It was breathtaking, yes, but also empty, silent, like a palace built to house ghosts. "We are landing," Damian said without looking up from his tablet. During the 40-minute flight from Manhattan, he had spoken barely a word to her. Elena had simply followed his lead. Clutching a small overnight bag filled with the few belongings, she had managed to gather a sweater, a battered notebook, a photograph of her father when he was still strong. The helicopter touched down on a polished private helipad. Elena's heart thudded heavily as she braced herself for whatever life awaited her beyond the shimmering walls of the mansion, a life she had chosen, and yet never wanted. The helicopter blade slowed to a stop as the craft settled gently onto the landing pad. Waiting beside a sleek golf cart stood an older woman with silver hair swept into a flawless chignon, her black dress crisp and severe against the fading evening light. "That is Mrs. Harlow," Damian said as he stepped out, barely sparing the woman a glance. "She manages the estate. From now on, you will follow her instructions without question." Elena followed in silence, clutching the worn strap of her overnight bag. Mrs. B. Harlow's expression remained perfectly neutral as they approached, but Elena saw the flicker of surprise in the woman's sharp eyes, taking in her faded jeans, her scuffed sneakers, the blouse that had seen better days. "Welcome home, Mr. Hale," Mrs. Harlow said with a measured nod. "The East Wing has been prepared, as you requested." "Thank you," Damian replied briskly. Then, with the cool detachment of someone discussing a weather report, he added, "This is Elena Cross. We were married this afternoon." The housekeeper's carefully composed face slipped for just a heartbeat, a slight widening of the eyes, a subtle intake of breath. "Married. Sir, I had not been informed." "It was a private ceremony," Damian said curtly, leaving no room for further inquiry. "Please escort Mrs. Hale to her quarters and explain the estate protocols." The name Mrs. Hale felt foreign in Elena's ears, like a coat that did not fit her shoulders. She was not a wife. She was a 26-year-old art teacher who had traded her freedom for a father's life. "Of course, sir," Mrs. Harlow replied. "Would you like me to arrange a celebratory dinner?" "Unnecessary," Damian said, already walking away without a backward glance. "I will be working in my study." And just like that, Elena was left standing in a world she did not understand, with a life she no longer recognized. Once Damian's long strides had carried him out of sight, Mrs. Harlow turned toward her, and some of the frost in her expression thawed. "Well," she said, voice softer now, "this is unexpected. Please, follow me, Mrs. Hale." "Elena," she corrected gently. but Mrs. Harlow only smiled apologetically. "I am afraid Mr. Hale prefers formal address among the staff." They boarded the golf cart. Gliding along a winding path bordered by immaculate lawns and sculpted hedges, Elena caught glimpses of tennis courts, a shimmering pool, and a sun-drenched building that looked suspiciously like an art studio. "How many people live here?" Elena asked, trying to mask her unease. "Only Mr. Hale," Mrs. Harlow replied. "And now, of course, you. The staff live separately myself. The chef, 2 housekeepers, groundskeepers, and security personnel." The mansion rose before them, a 3-story masterpiece of steel and glass, shimmering against the twilight. Entire walls of the home were made of smart glass, capable of shifting from transparent to opaque with a single command. Despite all that openness, the house radiated a bone-deep coldness. "It is known as the Glass Mansion," Mrs. Harlow said as they approached the towering entrance. "Mr. Hale had it built 5 years ago." 5 years ago, Elena remembered, after the mysterious death of his first wife. The massive doors slid open soundlessly, and they stepped into a house that felt more like a museum than a home. Everything inside was pristine, sharp lines, neutral colors, furniture so perfectly arranged it seemed no human had ever dared to sit there. "This is the main living area," Mrs. Harlow explained, her voice low. "Although Mr. Hale rarely uses it. The kitchen is there, though all meals are prepared by the chef. The dining room, library, and Mr. Hale's office are down that corridor." They moved through spaces devoid of life, no family photographs, no worn books, no tokens of a life lived, only emptiness dressed in elegance. "Your quarters are in the East Wing," Mrs. Harlow continued, leading her up a floating staircase that seemed suspended by air. "He keeps a strict schedule," she said. "Breakfast at 7, lunch at 12:30, dinner at 7 sharp. Mr. Hale works from 5 in the morning until 8 at night most days." Elena nodded numbly, absorbing each fact as if memorizing a set of survival rules. "Housekeeping will provide appropriate clothing for you by morning," Mrs. Harlow added. "Appropriate clothing. Mr. Hale maintains certain standards for his household," Mrs. Harlow said delicately. "Your current wardrobe does not meet them." Elena looked down at her jeans and worn blouse, suddenly feeling every frayed thread pressing against her skin. The East Wing unfolded into a spacious private suite, a bedroom, a small sitting room, a marble bathroom, and a walk-in closet waiting for clothes she had not chosen. It was beautiful. It was a cage. The East Wing was grand, but it did not feel welcoming. Mrs. Harlow led Elena Cross into a private suite, complete with a bedroom, a sitting room, a marble-clad bathroom, and a cavernous walk-in closet. Luxurious. Yes, but it was a cold luxury, a place meant to impress, not comfort. "This will be your private quarters," Mrs. Harlow said gently. "Mr. Hale keeps his residence in the West Wing." Elena set her bag down slowly, a wave of quiet relief washing over her. At least she would not have to share a bed with him. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. "There is one important rule," Mrs. B. Harlow continued, her voice tightening slightly. "The 3rd floor is strictly off-limits, especially the North Wing." Elena's curiosity sparked despite herself. "What's in the North Wing?" she asked. For the first time, the polished mask on Mrs. Harlow's face slipped. "That is not for me to explain," she said crisply. She handed Elena a thin, gleaming tablet. "House rules, permitted areas, daily schedules, and behavior expectations," she said, almost apologetically. "Behavior expectations." as if Elena were a new pet to be trained. "Mrs. Harlow," Elena asked quietly, "what happened to Mr. Hale's first wife?" The housekeeper froze, her fingers tightening slightly over the tablet. "That is not a subject we discuss," she said after a long pause. "But you knew her." Elena pressed gently. A heavy sigh escaped the older woman's lips. "I have been with the Hale family for nearly 30 years. Yes, I knew her." There was a sadness there, hidden beneath years of discipline. "Was he always like this?" Elena asked before she could stop herself. Mrs. Harlow hesitated, a shadow passing over her features. "No," she said quietly. "Mr. Hale was very different before the accident." "What accident?" Elena asked, but Mrs. Harlow shook her head, already stepping toward the door. "Dinner is served promptly at 7, she said, her tone cool again. "Mr. Hale dislikes tardiness." And just like that, the conversation ended, left alone. Elena explored what was now her gilded prison. The closet stood empty, waiting for the appropriate clothing promised to her by morning. The bathroom gleamed with marble and gold, beautiful and utterly impersonal. A small desk sat by the window, neatly stocked with art history books, a detail that unsettled her more than comforted her. Someone had taken the time to research her life, her interests, her passions. The bedroom window opened onto a sprawling rose garden, the flowers trembling in the evening breeze. As night fell, the smart glass walls faded to transparency, revealing a wide stretch of dark, endless sky. It made Elena feel exposed, visible from every angle, a pawn in a game she barely understood. Without proper nightclothes, she curled up in her worn t-shirt, sinking into the vast softness of the unfamiliar bed, but sleep, when it came, was thin and restless. Around 2 in the morning, she gave up, pulling on her sweater. Elena padded barefoot into the silent hallways. The house was vast and still, shadows pooling in the corners. Somehow, her wandering steps carried her toward the forbidden 3rd floor. The air there felt different, heavier, expectant. At the end of a long, dark corridor stood a door, the north wing. Her hand hesitated on the handle. She turned it gently, locked. "You were warned." The low voice behind her made her jump, spinning around. Elena found Damian Hale standing only a few steps away. He wore nothing but a black t-shirt and loose pajama pants. His hair rumpled from sleep, but his expression was sharp, severe. "I could not sleep," Elena stammered. "So you decided to break into restricted parts of my home?" he asked, voice dangerously quiet. "I was curious," she admitted, meeting his gaze. "Curiosity is not a virtue here. Mrs. Hale," he said, her new name sharp as a blade on his tongue. "Return to your room, now. If you value our arrangement, you will never set foot here again." Something in Elena, tired and raw, refused to cower. "What is behind that door that you are so afraid for me to see?" A dangerous light flashed in Damian's eyes. "That is none of your concern. Your role is to be my wife in public, not to pry into the parts of me that are none of your business." "But if I am to convince the world we are married," Elena said softly, "shouldn't I know the man I am supposed to love?" Damian stepped closer, towering over her, the tension between them crackling like a live wire. "Everything you need to know is written in the contract," he said coldly. "Break my rules again, and the consequences will be swift. Your father's freedom depends on your obedience. Do I make myself clear?" Elena swallowed back every retort burning on her tongue, fighting to hold her head high. She turned and walked away, feeling the heat of his gaze pressing into her back with every step. She did not know it yet, But this first crack in the fortress Damian Hale had built around himself would not be the last. As Elena Cross turned away, she could feel Damian Hale's gaze lingering on her back. For one fleeting moment, she thought she saw something raw flicker behind his coldness. Not anger, but something that looked dangerously close to pain. It disappeared almost instantly, hidden behind the unbreakable armor he wore so well. The glass mansion was a house of open walls and endless reflections. Its owner, however, remained a closed fortress, one Elena was stubbornly determined to understand. Stand closer to him, Mrs. Hale. The photographer's assistant tugged gently at Elena's elbow for the 5th time, steering her closer against Damian's side. Damian's arm circled her waist, his hold firm but never bruising, the perfect touch for the perfect illusion. To the guests gathered at the Hale Foundation charity gala, they looked every bit the blissful newlyweds. Only Elena could feel the tautness in Damian's body, the way his muscles coiled under his calm exterior. 2 weeks. It had been 2 weeks since she arrived at the glass mansion. 2 weeks of designer gowns she would never have chosen, of studying his routines, of rehearsing the careful fiction they now presented to the world. Tonight was her first official appearance as Mrs. Hale. Perfect, the photographer chirped. Now, lean into him. Mrs. Hale, show us that newlywed glow. Elena summoned a smile, tilting her head toward Damian's shoulder as they had practiced. The scent of his cologne, woodsy and expensive, filled her senses, wrapping around her like invisible chains. Excellent. The photographer beamed. Mr. Hale, you are a lucky man indeed. Damian's smile, precise and practiced, never touched his eyes. As they made their way toward the grand ballroom, Damian's hand rested possessively at the small of her back. His touch burned through the thin silk of her midnight blue gown, anchoring her in a world that was no more real than the polished marble floors beneath their feet. Remember, he murmured against her ear, his breath warm. Julian Carrington, my chief financial officer Harris Mitchell, and board members Taylor and Wong will be approaching us soon. Smile, be charming, speak only when necessary. I am not an idiot, Elena whispered back. No, he agreed softly, but you are untested. His gaze swept the glittering crowd like a general surveying a battlefield. These people are sharks. Give them nothing to feed on. Us, she thought bitterly. He said us, but there was no us. Only a man and a woman trapped inside a beautiful lie. Something that almost resembled approval flickered in Damian's eyes. Good, keep that fire hidden until we are home. He said, home. The glass mansion was many things stunning, intimidating, soulless, but never home. Julian Carrington approached first, a glass of champagne in hand, his easy charm lighting up the room. At last, he said warmly, the golden couple has arrived. Damian, you have been hiding your beautiful bride away far too long. Julian kissed Elena's cheek, his smile genuine enough to fool anyone. But Elena caught something sharper in his eyes, curiosity, maybe, or suspicion. Elena needed time to settle. Damian answered smoothly. It is not every day one marries America's most eligible bachelor. Indeed not, Julian said, studying Elena with keen interest. And how are you finding married life? Mrs. Hale, everything you dreamed. It was a test. She knew it. Elena kept her smile soft and steady. Damian has been unexpectedly thoughtful, she said. He even arranged an art studio for me, a wedding gift. That, at least, was no lie. 3 days after she arrived, Mrs. Harlow had led her to a sunlit room filled with every kind of paint, canvas, and brush she could imagine. Not the forbidden north wing, but a peace offering of sorts. Always the romantic, Julian teased, though something in his expression hardened. I still cannot believe you managed to keep the courtship secret. Damian, some things, Damian replied coolly, are better kept private. Before more questions could be asked, a new figure appeared, a woman so striking it was impossible not to notice. She wore a gown the color of champagne, clinging to every curve, and her smile was a blade sheathed in sweetness. Damian, she purred, brushing her lips near his cheek in a lingering air kiss. Darling, you have been neglecting me. Elena felt Damian's body stiffen beside her, though his face betrayed nothing. Aren't you going to introduce me to your lovely bride? Damian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and just like that, Elena realized not all the battles she would fight here would be silent. Some would have sharp smiles and sharper claws. Vivian, Damian Hale said, his voice cool as glass. I was not aware you were attending tonight. Vivian Chamberlain's smile was razor sharp as she adjusted the shimmering strap of her gown. The Chamberlain Foundation always supports causes for children, she said lightly, though her gaze skimmed over Elena Cross with barely disguised disdain. So, this is her. Her tone made it sound as if Elena were something unfortunate Damian had picked up off the street. When Julian mentioned you had married, Vivian continued, turning back to Damian with a mock laugh. I assumed it was some elaborate joke. Damian kept his posture rigid. Vivian, meet Elena Hale. Elena. This is Vivian, an old friend. The way Vivian's manicured fingers brushed Damian's arm possessively intimately told Elena that old friend barely scratched the surface. Charmed, Vivian said, the word brittle with coldness. Tell me, where exactly did you two meet? It seems odd. No one in our circles had heard a whisper. Elena recognized the trap instantly. She smiled sweetly. We first crossed paths through my father, a business introduction that grew into something more personal. Sometimes, she added with a gentle shrug, the heart knows what the mind is slower to accept. Vivian's smile tightened, her amusement fading. How quaint, she said, voice dripping disdain. And before you became Mrs. Hale, what did you do? Dear, I taught art to children in underserved communities. Elena answered without hesitation. A teacher, Vivian murmured, as if Elena had said she scrubbed floors. How very noble. She turned to Damian, her voice thick with mockery. Always the philanthropist. Aren't you? First you write the checks. Now you marry the charity cases. Damian's eyes darkened, the dangerous edge returning to his face. Before he could respond, Harris Mitchell, his chief financial officer, appeared. A welcome interruption. Mr. Hale, Harris said quietly. The Wakefield delegation is requesting a moment of your time. Damian inclined his head curtly. If you will excuse us, he said to Vivian, offering no apology. As they crossed the ballroom, Elena leaned closer and whispered, ex-girlfriend? Ex-fiancé, Damian corrected, his tone clipped. She seems delightful, Elena said dryly. A ghost of a smile tugged at Damian's mouth. She will be watching your every move tonight. Be careful. The next hour blurred into a dizzying parade of introductions. Elena smiled until her face hurt, reciting the well-rehearsed lines about their whirlwind romance. She noticed the way people deferred to Damian, the careful laughter, the measured compliments. It was not respect she saw in their eyes. It was fear, during a rare moment alone at their table. Elena watched him from across the room, surrounded by board members and politicians. Damian played the role of attentive husband, flawlessly, when necessary. A guiding hand here, a glance there, but when no one was watching, it was as if she did not exist. A young server approached their table, hands trembling slightly as he poured water into their glasses. In his nervousness, the pitcher tipped too far, spilling water across the pristine tablecloth. "I am so sorry, ma'am," the boy stammered, desperately blotting at the mess. "It's just water," Elena said kindly. "No harm done." The boy's shoulders relaxed until Damian returned. His sharp eyes took in the damp tablecloth in a single glance. "What happened here?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Nothing serious," Elena said quickly. "Incompetence," Damian snapped. His gaze pinned the young server in place. "How long have you been working here?" 2 weeks, sir," the boy answered, voice shaking. "Make tonight your last," Damian said coldly. "We do not tolerate sloppiness." The boy's face crumpled. "Please, Mr. Hale, I need this job. My mother's medical bills. That sounds like a personal problem." Damian cut him off. "Not Hale Corporation's concern." Elena rose to her feet so suddenly her chair scraped the floor. "May I have a word with you?" she said sharply. In a quiet corner, away from the glances of the glittering crowd, Elena turned to face him. "You are firing someone over a spilled glass of water," she said, trying to keep her voice even. "I am dismissing someone who cannot perform basic tasks properly," Damian answered coolly. "He made one mistake." Elena pressed. "One tiny mistake. Mistakes cost money," Damian said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "He is working to pay for his mother's treatments," she said, anger creeping into her voice. "And you think compassion is weakness." Damian's face hardened, but there was a flicker of something else there, too, something almost uncertain. "What would you have me do, Elena?" he asked, voice low. "Pat him on the head and tell him incompetence is acceptable." "No," she said, voice trembling with passion, "but recognize that people are not machines. They bleed, they fear, they try." For a moment, neither spoke. The music swelled around them, and Elena realized she had just cracked the first fracture into Damian Hale's perfect, ruthless shell. For a long moment, Damian Hale said nothing. He simply studied Elena Cross, his face an unreadable mask. Then, without a word, he turned and strode back toward their table. Elena followed, her cheeks burning with embarrassment at her own outburst. She expected him to pretend the moment had never happened. Instead, to her astonishment, Damian stopped in front of the young server, still nervously wiping at the table. "What is your name?" he asked curtly. "Kyle, sir," the boy answered, voice trembling. "Consider this your warning, Kyle," Damian said. "Improve your work, or you will need to find employment elsewhere." Relief flooded the boy's face. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." When Damian returned to Elena's side, she stared at him, stunned. "Do not look so surprised," he muttered, adjusting his cufflink. "Even monsters can be reasonable." "I do not think you are a monster," Elena said softly. For a heartbeat, their eyes locked and something unguarded flickered in his expression. Something raw and human. He hid it quickly, slipping the mask back into place. "Do not be naive," he said gruffly, but the usual sharpness in his voice was dulled, worn down by something he could not quite conceal. Later that evening, as they prepared to leave the gala, Elena found herself alone in the powder room. Vivian Chamberlain appeared in the mirror beside her, perfect in every way from her hair to her smile sharpened like a dagger. "Enjoying playing princess," Vivian said coolly, dabbing at her flawless lipstick. "Do not get comfortable. Damian gets bored." Quickly, "Thanks for the advice," Elena replied evenly, Vivian's smile widened, not with kindness, but with something much colder. It is not advice. It is a warning. She leaned in, voice dropping to a whisper. I know exactly where you came from. This fairy tale of yours has an expiration date. Vivian stepped back, her perfume hanging heavy in the air. Ask him about the North Wing sometime. She added, almost casually. Ask him what he is hiding. Before Elena could speak, Vivian swept out of the room like a queen abandoning a subject. When Elena emerged, she found Damian waiting for her, his posture tense, his eyes tracking Vivian's retreat with visible contempt. What did she say to you? He demanded. Voice low. Nothing important, Elena said lightly, watching him carefully. Just something. About the North Wing. Damian's face drained of color. For the first time since she had met him, his composure cracked completely. The pain that flashed across his features was sharp, unhidden, devastating. Stay away from Vivian, he said, his voice rough, and never, ever mention that room again. They rode back to Fairhill in silence. The dark interior of the car was filled only with the hum of tires on asphalt. Elena watched him from the corner of her eye, not the ruthless tycoon the world feared, but a man carrying wounds so deep he had built a fortress of steel and glass around them. 3 weeks passed. Elena stared at her phone, reading the text message from St. Agnes Hospital. Your father is stable but requires additional testing. Please contact us to discuss payment options. Although Damian had arranged for her father's care, the hospital still reached out to her directly for decisions. She glanced at the clock, 5:30 in the morning. She knew Damian would already be in his home office. Since the gala, he had thrown himself deeper into his work, slipping out before she woke and returning long after she slept. The few brief interactions they had were polite, distant, as if the fragile moment between them at the gala had never happened at all. Summoning her courage, Elena made her way down the endless hallways to his office door and knocked. Enter, came his voice. Damian sat behind a sleek glass desk, 3 monitors casting a cold glow across his face. He did not look up. I need to visit my father today, she said quietly. His fingers paused on the keyboard. I will have Davis drive you after lunch. He replied, Thank you, she murmured. For a moment she hesitated, heart pounding, before speaking again. Was there something else? He asked, finally meeting her eyes. The hospital called. She said, They need to run more tests. I thought you had arranged to cover everything. Damian reached for his phone without a word. I will take care of it, he said. I would like to understand what is happening with his treatment, Elena added, her voice steady but gentle. Damian sighed quietly, pinching the bridge of his nose. Your father has specific medical needs. Sometimes the billing systems do not process our arrangement correctly. He made a brief call, his words clipped and efficient, before setting the phone back down. It is handled, he said simply, and for the first time, Elena wondered if beneath the cold precision, Damian Hale was a man who had long forgotten what it meant to care and was slowly, painfully remembering it. It's resolved. Damian Hale's voice was quiet, almost dismissive, just like that. Just like everything else in his meticulously ordered world, Elena Cross studied him from across the room, not a hair out of place. His tailored suit immaculate, his face carved from ice, and yet something had shifted since the night of the gala. The wall he kept between them still stood, but now there were cracks, tiny, almost invisible, but they were there. I am heading to New York today, Damian said suddenly. She blinked, unsure why he was sharing that information. Overnight board meetings, she said, guessing. He nodded curtly. Julian will check in while I am gone." Without another word, he turned back to his glowing monitors, dismissing her as easily as closing a door. After breakfast, Davis drove Elena to St. Mo Agnes Hospital. Her father looked smaller than she remembered, swallowed by the starched white sheets. The strong, stubborn man who had once carried her on his shoulders now seemed so fragile it broke her heart. "Elena," he rasped, reaching for her hand. "You look different." She glanced down at her outfit, a soft cashmere sweater. Tailored trousers clothes she never would have afforded in her old life, clothes that felt like they belonged to someone else. "How are you feeling?" she asked, dodging the weight of his words. "Better," he said, squeezing her hand weakly. "Thanks to this place." But his eyes darkened with worry. "Elena, what did you do? How are you paying for all this?" She swallowed the lump rising in her throat. "I made an arrangement," she said carefully, "with Damian Hale. His company is handling everything." Fear crept into her father's tired eyes. "What kind of arrangement?" "It does not matter," she said, forcing a smile she did not feel. "It matters to me," he insisted, gripping her hand tighter. "What did that man make you do?" "Nothing I wasn't willing to," she lied softly. "Please, just focus on getting stronger." She kissed his forehead, ignoring the tightness in her chest, and left before he could ask more questions she had no good answers for. On the way back, Elena asked Davis to stop at her old apartment. It felt strange, unlocking the door with her old key as if stepping into a life that no longer fit. She moved through the small, dusty rooms, gathering fragments of who she used to be, a few photo albums, her mother's jewelry box, a tin of worn brushes and oil paints, supplies too intimate, too important to leave behind. As Davis loaded the last box into the car, her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "Find the files. Your father will not be safe at St. Agnes forever." Elena's blood ran cold. She tried calling the number back, disconnected, back at the glass mansion. The sky was deepening into twilight. She found Mrs. Harlow in the kitchen, overseeing dinner preparations. "Mrs. Harlow?" Elena asked, trying to sound casual. "Has anyone unusual been around the property lately?" The housekeeper looked surprised. "No, ma'am. Security here is thorough. Why do you ask?" "No reason." Elena lied. She hesitated, then asked the question that had been gnawing at her since that night at the gala. "You once said you knew her, Damian's first wife. What was she like, Mrs.?" Harlow's hand stilled over the cutting board. "She was different," the older woman said quietly. "Vibrant. For a time, she turned this house into something more than just glass and stone." "And her death?" Elena asked. Mrs. Harlow's voice dropped. "A car accident on the coastal road. Mr. Hale was never the same after that. If you'll excuse me," she added, straightening her apron. "I need to finish dinner." Left alone, Elena wandered through the empty rooms of the mansion. The threatening text echoed in her mind. "Find the files." But what files? She found herself in the main living area, a space so rarely used it felt like a tomb. In the corner stood a grandfather clock, oddly out of place among the modern furnishings. Something about it drew her closer. As she inspected its ornate face, she noticed the glass panel covering the pendulum was slightly ajar. Curious, she opened it further. The pendulum swung lazily, but something else caught her eye, a small recess hidden in the wood. Reaching in, her fingers brushed against cold metal. She pulled out a tiny key, old and delicate, with an emerald embedded in its handle. It was beautiful, priceless, and hidden where no one would think to look. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from the same unknown number, clocks ticking. Find the files. Or else, the key trembled in her hand as she stared down at it. Whatever game she had been dragged into, it was only just beginning. Was she being watched even inside the mansion? The thought made Elena Cross shiver. She slipped the small emerald key into her pocket and hurried to her suite, locking the door behind her with trembling hands. Tonight, Julian Carrington was scheduled to check in, and Elena needed answers more than ever. When Julian arrived, he brought dinner from a sleek restaurant in town, setting the dishes on the formal dining room table with the ease of someone accustomed to wealth. He wore his usual polished charm like a second skin, but beneath it, Elena sensed the sharpness of his scrutiny. "Damian mentioned you visited your father today," Julian said lightly as they ate. "How is Gregory doing?" "Improving?" Elena replied carefully. "The care at St. Agnes is excellent." Julian nodded, swirling his wine. "Damian can be generous when it suits him." "You have known him a long time," Elena said, studying him. "Since prep school," Julian said. "We went on to Yale together." He sipped his wine, then added, "He was not always like this." "Mrs. Harlow said something similar," Elena ventured. For a moment, Julian's polite smile faltered, and something colder slid into his gaze. "The staff gossiped too much." "Hardly gossip," Elena said, simply noting that someone changes after losing a spouse. "It's complicated," Julian said, setting his glass down with a soft click. "Damian does not speak of it. I suggest you follow his example." The warning in his voice was unmistakable. After Julian left, Elena returned to her room and opened her laptop. She typed into the search bar Amelia Hale, mostly. She found glossy photos on society pages, a beautiful woman with kind eyes, captured smiling at galas, charity events, her hand resting lightly on Damian's arm. In those photos, Damian was different, softer, younger, looking at his wife with unmistakable adoration. The more recent articles were sparse and clinical tragedy strikes tech mogul's wife killed in storm, according to reports. Amelia had been driving along the coastal road during a severe storm when her car skidded off a cliff. The investigation had ruled it an accident, no mechanical failure. No foul play, just terrible weather and bad luck. But something gnawed at Elena 5 years ago, the same time Damian built the glass mansion, the same time he sealed off the north wing. The door to her room swung open without warning. Damian Hale stood in the doorway, his expression thunderous. "You are back early," Elena said quickly, snapping her laptop closed. "The meeting ended sooner than expected," he said, striding toward her with long, controlled steps. His eyes, cold and sharp, fell on the laptop. "What were you looking at?" "Nothing important," she said too quickly. "Do not lie to me," he growled. He flipped the laptop open. The search results glowed back at him. His entire body stiffened. "Who told you to dig into my wife?" "No one," Elena said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I was curious." "Curious." Damian spat the word like a curse. "Did it occur to you that some things are not your business? Did it occur to you," Elena countered, "that receiving threatening messages might make me want to understand the danger I have been dragged into?" That made him stop. "What messages?" he demanded. She handed him her phone. Damian's face darkened as he read the texts. "How long has this been happening?" "The first came today," Elena said. "After I found this." She pulled the small emerald key from her pocket and placed it carefully on the table between them. Damian stared at it, the color draining from his face. "Where did you find that?" he asked, his voice raw. "It was hidden inside the grandfather clock," Elena answered. "That is impossible." he said, almost to himself. That key was locked in my private safe. For the first time since she had known him, Damian looked genuinely shaken, unmoored. What does it open? She asked. Nothing that concerns you. He snapped. Reaching for the key, Elena pulled it back, her heart pounding. Someone thinks this key will help me find files. They believe those files are connected to my father. If he is in danger, I deserve to know why. Damian's face twisted with fury and something deeper, something like grief. Your father is in danger because he made dangerous choices, he said harshly. Choices that cost my wife her life. The accusation hung between them, heavy and sharp. Elena's mouth went dry. What are you talking about? She whispered. Damian raked a hand through his hair, the perfect polish of his control slipping away. It was not just my wife, he said, his voice cracking. Amelia was the chief financial investigator for Hale Corporation. She was uncovering accounting fraud. And then she died. Your father was one of our contractors during that time, Damian Hale said quietly. Elena Cross felt the floor tilt beneath her. You think my father had something to do with your wife's death? Damian's face remained carved from stone, but his voice wavered just enough to betray the truth. I think someone murdered her to cover financial crimes, and your father's records might hold the proof. Elena struggled to breathe under the weight of it all. Is that why you married me? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. To get close to him, Damian did not flinch. At first, yes. The honesty cut deeper than any lie ever could. This marriage, he continued, gave me access to investigate quietly, without tipping off the people who might want me dead next. The betrayal hit her harder than she expected, and yet, when she looked into his eyes, she saw something new there, something broken. And now, she asked. For the first time, his cold mask slipped, revealing a flicker of something that looked dangerously close to regret. Now, I do not know, he said, without thinking. Elena held out the emerald key between them. If this can help you find whoever took her from you, then use it. His fingers brushed against hers as he took the key. The brief contact sent a current racing up her arm, leaving her shaken for reasons she could not name. These messages, Elena said, voice low. They mean someone knows you are digging. Damian nodded grimly. Safe was never part of our arrangement, he said. He studied her for a long moment, as if seeing her for the very first time. No, he said quietly. It was not. He turned toward the door, then hesitated. Elena, thank you. And then he was gone, leaving her standing alone in a house filled with more questions than answers. That night, Elena sat on the edge of her bed, staring into the darkness. The mansion around her, beautiful and sterile, felt like a tomb built to house secrets. Secrets someone was willing to kill to protect. And now, that someone knew, she was looking. The next morning, she woke to find 2 security guards stationed outside her door. Mr. Hale's orders, one of them said in a voice devoid of emotion. You are not to leave the property without escort. The texts had changed everything. Her freedom, like the rest of her life, had quietly vanished. For 3 days, Elena barely glimpsed Damian as he worked with private security teams to trace the messages. The emerald key disappeared into his possession, locked away along with her chance to move freely through the mansion. On the 4th morning, she found him not in his glass office, but in the kitchen, pouring himself a cup of coffee. For a moment, Elena simply stared. He wore jeans and a Henley shirt, his hair tousled, his stance relaxed. He looked almost human. You look like a regular person, she said, grabbing a mug for herself. Disappointing, isn't it? A ghost of a smile played at the corners of his mouth. Actually, she said, smiling back before she could stop herself, it's an improvement. Damian studied her across the rim of his mug. We need to talk. The garden, perhaps. They walked through the rose gardens to a secluded bench, security keeping their distance. The text came from a burner phone, Damian said without preamble. Untraceable, but we have tightened security at St. Agnes. Your father is safe. Thank you, Elena said softly. She hesitated, then asked, Have you figured out what the key opens? He nodded. It unlocks a safe deposit box I did not know existed. His jaw tightened with frustration. Julian is arranging access. You trust Julian with this? Elena asked carefully. Damian's eyes sharpened at once. Of course. Why would I not? Elena chose her next words with care. Julian seems very invested in our marriage. In me. Julian is protective, Damian said. He saw what losing Amelia did to me. They fell into a heavy silence. What was she investigating? Elena asked. Voice barely above a whisper. Damian looked away, staring into the distance. Financial discrepancies, he said finally. Millions routed through shell companies. Amelia suspected someone inside Hale Corporation was working with external contractors to siphon money. She was close to uncovering them when she died. Elena's stomach twisted. And my father? She asked. Damian's eyes met hers. Unreadable. Your father's firm handled our international tax structures at the time. Amelia found irregularities in his records. Elena swallowed hard, nausea rising. My father is not a criminal, she said fiercely. Everyone has a price. Damian said softly. Even the best people. Not everyone, Elena whispered. Damian turned fully to face her, the early morning light catching the silver at his temples. You married me for money, he said. No anger in his voice, just quiet truth. The accusation stung because it was not entirely false. I married you to save my father, she said steadily, and you married me to catch his co-conspirators. A bitter smile ghosted across his lips, and yet, here we are, drinking coffee in a garden full of roses, pretending we are not both prisoners of our own choices, sitting together on the garden bench. For a fleeting moment, Damian Hale and Elena Cross looked almost like any ordinary couple. The observation hovered between them. Unspoken, but understood something between them had changed. Why did you build this place? Elena asked softly, her gaze sweeping over the sprawling glass mansion behind them. It is beautiful, but it feels so cold. Pain flickered across Damian's face, there and gone before he could bury it. After Amelia died, our old house felt like a tomb, he said, voice rough. I wanted something new, somewhere without memories, somewhere I could see the danger coming. Elena's heart ached at the rawness in his tone. All this glass, she murmured. Yet the most important things you keep locked away. She meant the north wing, but he heard the deeper truth beneath her words. Some things, he said quietly, are too painful to put on display. His eyes darkened. The north room? It was Amelia's art studio. Elena's breath caught. She painted. Just like me. I have not stepped inside since the day she died, Damian admitted. I could not dismantle it. I could not even look. Understanding washed over Elena like a tide. That is why you created the studio for me, she whispered. He did not answer, but he did not deny it either. And somehow, that silence felt more intimate than any confession. 3 days later, Julian Carrington returned to the mansion, carrying the contents of the safe deposit box, a thick, sealed envelope and a slim USB drive. It is encrypted, Julian said as Damian plugged the drive into his laptop. Whoever locked this down knew what they were doing. They gathered in Damian's office, an unlikely trio bound together by secrets and the ghosts of the past. Hours passed as they tried password after password. "Try your anniversary," Elena suggested finally. "Already did," Damian said grimly. She hesitated, then said, "What about the GPS coordinates of where she died?" Damian's face tightened, but he tried it. Nothing. "We are missing something obvious," Julian muttered, loosening his tie. Amelia was methodical. She would use something meaningful but not obvious. Elena picked up the sealed envelope, turning it over slowly. In one corner, nearly invisible, was a tiny hand-drawn constellation. "It is a star pattern," she said softly. "Cassiopeia." Damian's head snapped up. "What did you say?" "Cassiopeia," Elena repeated. "There's a drawing of it here." Damian froze. "Her middle name," he whispered. "Cassie. Her grandmother was an astronomer." His fingers flew across the keyboard. Typing the name into the prompt, the drive unlocked. Hundreds of files bloomed onto the screen spreadsheets. Photographs, emails. Damian leaned forward, scanning the documents with a reverence that made Elena's heart clench. "She found it," he whispered. "She found everything." As they pored over the files, a grim pattern emerged. Money had been siphoned out of Hale Corporation, laundered through shell companies disguised as overseas expenses. Gregory Cross's signature is on several of these tax structures, Julian noted grimly. Elena felt her stomach twist painfully. "That does not mean he knew," she said desperately. "He could have signed unknowingly." Julian clicked on a series of emails. The contents chilled her blood. The language was clear. Gregory Cross had not only known, he had actively helped to hide the transactions. "There is more," Julian said, opening another folder labeled Collins. Inside were surveillance photographs. James Collins, the former chief operating officer of Hale Corporation, meeting shady figures in parking lots and dimly lit restaurants. One photograph froze Elena's blood. Her father, sitting across from Collins, hands folded tightly in his lap. Collins resigned just days before Amelia's death. Damian said quietly, "I always suspected he realized she was getting too close." "And you think—" Elena could not finish the sentence. Damian's jaw clenched. "I believe he had her killed," he said, voice low and tight, "but I could never prove it." Julian's phone buzzed sharply, breaking the heavy silence. He glanced at the screen, his brows furrowing. "It is Vivian," he said. "She is asking about the safe deposit box." Damian stiffened immediately. "How would she even know about that?" "She says she needs to speak with you," Julian added. "Urgently." Elena felt the first true ripple of fear settle deep in her bones. Whatever they had uncovered, they were not the only ones looking anymore. Alarms blared silently in Elena Cross's mind. "Do not tell her anything," she said sharply. Julian Carrington raised an eyebrow, mildly amused. "Vivian and Damian have a long history. She has connections. She deserves nothing." Damian cut in, his voice low and final. "Elena is right," he added, his gaze hard. "Tell no one about what we found." After Julian left, Damian turned toward Elena, tension still thrumming through his body. "Your instincts about Vivian were correct," he said, "at the gala. She threatened me. She mentioned the North Wing specifically." He paced the room, agitation bleeding through his usually impenetrable exterior. "Vivian and Amelia despised each other," he said. "Vivian never forgave me for ending our engagement when I met Amelia." "Could she be connected to Collins?" Elena asked carefully. "Possibly," Damian said. "They served on several charity boards together. They would have had opportunity. Elena turned back to the files spread out across Damian's desk, a chill running through her. My father needs to explain his role in all of this. Damian nodded grimly. We will visit him tomorrow. That night, restless and unable to sleep, Elena wandered toward her art studio, her sanctuary. She was startled to find Damian already there, standing before one of her canvases, his arms folded, his expression unguarded for once. You are talented, he said, without turning around. She stepped closer, heart pounding. Amelia was a painter too, Elena said softly. I would like to see her work one day. She added. Damian did not answer directly. Instead, he stared at the painting in front of him, a swirling abstraction of loss and hope tangled together. You are nothing like what I expected. Elena Cross, he said, voice thick with something she could not quite name. Disappointed, she teased. But her voice was too soft, too raw. He turned, then, facing her fully. I plan to use you to solve a crime, he said, each word measured. Not to what? She asked. Breathless, he stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat of him. For a heartbeat, she thought he might kiss her. The air between them buzzed with an intensity that stole her breath. Then, his phone rang sharply. Shattering the fragile moment, he pulled it from his pocket. Glancing at the screen, Julian, Damian answered, his posture stiffening instantly. When are you sure? He hung up, his face grim. Your father had a setback, he said. We need to go, now. They raced through the halls of St. Agnes Hospital, Elena's heart hammering as she followed Damian toward her father's room. 2 armed guards stood at the door, a testament to Damian's thoroughness. What happened? Elena cried as a doctor emerged. He suffered a cardiac episode, the doctor explained, his face serious. We have stabilized him, but it was severe. He glanced at Damian. Mr. Hale, could I speak with you privately? While they conferred, Elena pushed into the room. Her father lay pale and fragile against the starched sheets, oxygen tubes in his nose, monitors beeping steadily in the dim light. His eyes fluttered open as she approached. Elena, he rasped, reaching weakly for her hand. You should not be here. Of course, I should, she whispered fiercely, taking his hand in both of hers. You scared me. Listen to me, he said, his grip surprisingly strong. You need to leave, now. Dad, what are you talking about? The messages, he whispered. They are watching you. They know you found the files. Elena's blood ran cold. You know about the texts. Gregory's eyes flickered anxiously toward the door. Julian came to see me yesterday, he said, voice hoarse. He said you and Damian were investigating Amelia's death, that you found her hidden evidence. What did you tell him? Elena demanded. Nothing, Gregory said quickly. But he knows, Elena. Julian is part of it. Before she could respond, the door swung open. Damian entered, his expression deceptively calm. The doctor mentioned you had some visitors yesterday. Mr. Cross, Damian said smoothly. Gregory turned his face away. Just nurses, he muttered. Damian's mouth hardened into a thin line. Security footage shows Julian Carrington entering your room at 2:15, he said, his voice cutting. You spoke for 20 minutes. The truth hung heavy in the sterile hospital air, and for the first time, Elena realized the danger was closer than they had ever imagined. The tension in the hospital room was so thick it felt hard to breathe. What did he want? Damian Hale asked quietly. A heavy silence stretched between them before Gregory Cross let out a long, broken sigh. He asked what I knew about Amelia's investigation. Gregory said, voice cracking. Whether I had told Elena anything. And had you? Damian pressed. Gregory closed his eyes. Shame written across every line of his face. No, I kept my silence for 5 years, even from my own daughter. Elena felt her entire world tilt under her feet. What silence? Dad, she whispered. Tears welled up in Gregory's eyes. I was supposed to review international tax structures for Hale Corporation. He rasped. Routine work, nothing unusual. He swallowed hard, struggling for breath. Then I found discrepancies, he said. Millions, routed through shell companies. Collins's embezzlement scheme, Damian said grimly. Gregory nodded. When I reported it to Julian, he didn't even act surprised. He told me to ignore it, said it was a special project, approved by the board. Damian's jaw clenched. That was a lie. The board knew nothing. I realized that later, Gregory said, voice filled with regret. But by then, I had already signed off on documents I did not fully understand. Julian made it clear if the fraud became public, I would be implicated too. His breathing grew labored. I was a coward. I stayed silent until Amelia came to me. Damian's hands curled into fists at his sides. She was brilliant, Gregory whispered. She followed the money trail right to me. I told her everything about Julian, Collins, the shell companies. Elena clutched her father's hand, her heart breaking. So Julian knew Amelia was investigating him, she said, her voice barely audible. Not just knew, Gregory said, his eyes hollow. He helped Collins arrange the accident. The words felt like a gunshot in the small, sterile room. I overheard them, Gregory continued, voice trembling. I tried to warn her, but it was too late. Damian stepped back as if struck. You knew, he said, voice low and lethal. You knew who killed my wife. And you said nothing. Tears streamed down Gregory's gaunt cheeks. Julian threatened to destroy Elena if I spoke. And when I got sick, I needed money. Julian convinced me to use her name to forge her signature to trap her. The confession twisted like a knife in Elena's chest. He orchestrated her marriage to me, Damian said darkly, to keep you both under his control. Before they could say more, a nurse entered to check Gregory's vitals, momentarily breaking the terrible moment. When she left, Damian's phone buzzed sharply. Julian's name flashed across the screen. Don't tell him what you know, Gregory begged urgently. Damian answered, his face unreadable. Julian, he said smoothly. Yes, we're still at the hospital. He listened for a moment. Then his expression shifted subtly. I see. Yes, we will return shortly. He ended the call and turned to Elena. Julian's at the mansion, Damian said. He claims there's an urgent issue, something about the files being compromised. It's a trap, Gregory whispered, panic lacing his voice. Don't go back. If we run, we tip our hand, Damian said grimly. We need to play along. Just a little longer, until we secure the evidence. Elena felt torn apart, wanting to stay with her father, desperate to end this nightmare. Go, Gregory urged, his voice shaking. Finish this. Before leaving, Damian arranged for additional security at the hospital. In the car, his voice was a low, steady current of fury. The originals from the safe deposit box are locked in my private vault, he said. Julian doesn't have access. He glanced at Elena. We'll tell him we already sent the files to the FBI. It won't fool him for long, but it might force him to act recklessly and reveal his allies. Do you think he will believe it? Elena asked. Damian shook his head. No, but desperation makes people sloppy. When they arrived at the glass mansion, Julian was already waiting in Damian's office. He stood as they entered, his expression tight with concern. "There you are," Julian said, pulling Damian into a brief, familiar embrace. "How is Gregory?" "Stable," Damian replied, his voice smooth but watchful. Julian nodded, then leaned in. "Listen," he said urgently. "Something strange came up tonight. Security detected unusual access patterns on our internal servers." He paused. "I am worried." "Damian, really worried." Damian exchanged a glance with Elena. The final game had begun, and this time, they would not be the ones left broken. "Someone has been accessing the files," Julian Carrington said, raking a hand through his perfectly styled hair. His casual charm was cracking at the edges. "I am concerned Collins might have operatives inside your security team." "Collins is in Guatemala," Damian Hale said flatly. For the first time, Julian hesitated. "You found him." "The FBI found him," Damian corrected, his voice hard. "And they are very interested in what we uncovered." Alarm flared in Julian's eyes. "You contacted the FBI without consulting me," he demanded. Damian's expression turned dangerous. "Should I have consulted you?" "Julian," he asked softly, "the way you consulted me before Amelia died." The entire atmosphere of the room shifted like the moment before a storm breaks. Julian's mask of concern dropped. He sighed heavily and reached slowly toward his jacket. "So Gregory finally broke," he said, almost regretfully. "That is unfortunate. For you." Elena Cross stiffened as she saw the glint of metal. "We have proof," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Proof tying you to the embezzlement and Amelia's death." Julian's smile was cold as he pulled a small handgun from his jacket. "Actually, you have nothing," he sneered. "Nothing but the ramblings of a sick old man. And detailed records," Damian countered. "Every transaction, every conversation, including yours with Collins." Julian's eyes narrowed. "Where are these alleged records?" he asked, waving the gun lazily. "Not on the servers," he said with a smirk. "I wiped those an hour ago, and not in your safe either. I emptied it myself." For the first time, Damian's composure cracked. "You opened my safe," he said, voice low with fury. Julian chuckled darkly. "With the right leverage, anything is possible. Mrs. Harlow's grandchildren are very dear to her." He tilted the gun toward Elena. "Now," he said softly, "where are the originals?" "Gone," Damian said without hesitation. "Sent to my attorneys this morning." Julian studied him for a long moment, then laughed. "You're bluffing," he said. "You would never trust lawyers with this. The originals are still here, somewhere." He pointed the gun directly at Elena. "Tell me where, or she dies." Damian's voice was steady. "The North Wing," he said, "hidden in the art supplies." Julian gestured toward the door. "After you—" As they climbed the silent stairs to the forbidden third floor, Elena caught Damian's eye. He gave the barest nod, a silent promise. They both knew Julian would not let them live, no matter what they handed over. The door to the North Wing loomed ahead untouched for 5 long years. Damian's hand trembled slightly as he slid the key into the lock. "I always wondered what you kept hidden here," Julian mused. "A shrine, or proof of your guilt." "What are you talking about?" Elena asked. Stalling, Julian smiled thinly. Damian knew about the embezzlement. Collins paid him handsomely to look the other way. When Amelia got too close to the truth, Damian agreed she needed to be silenced. "That is a lie," Damian growled. "Is it?" Julian taunted. "Why else build this glass fortress immediately after her death? Guilt is a powerful architect." The door swung open, revealing a sunlit studio frozen in time. Paintings lined the walls, vibrant landscapes. portraits alive with color and passion, the heart and soul of a woman now long gone. "Where are the files?" Julian barked. Damian pointed calmly to a large seascape painting on the far wall. "Behind that," he said, as Julian moved toward it. Damian lunged. The gun went off, the shot shattering a window and letting in a blast of cold night air. Elena grabbed a heavy palette knife from the table, striking Julian's wrist as he tried to aim at Damian. The gun clattered to the floor. Julian kicked Damian back, scrambling desperately toward the weapon. Without thinking, Elena dove for it, her fingers closing around the cold metal just as Julian reached her. "Give it to me, you stupid girl," he snarled. Grabbing her by the throat, Elena choked, struggling. A sickening thud rang out as Damian brought a paint canister crashing down on Julian's head. Julian crumpled to the floor, unconscious but alive. Sirens wailed in the distance, a piercing promise of salvation. Damian sank to his knees beside Elena, gathering her into his arms, holding her tightly as she shook against him. For once, he made no attempt to hide the raw, shattered emotion on his face. The fortress had fallen, but somewhere in the wreckage, something fragile and real had finally begun to grow. "Are you hurt?" Damian Hale's hands moved urgently over Elena Cross's face, searching for injuries with a desperation he could no longer hide. "I'm okay," she rasped, her throat raw from Julian's brutal grip. Damian closed his eyes for a moment, his shoulders sagging with relief. "I almost lost you," he said hoarsely. The admission seemed torn from somewhere deep inside him. "I could not bear to lose someone else. He broke off, unable to finish the thought. Police and security forces flooded into the north wing, swiftly securing Julian's unconscious form and sweeping the studio for evidence. Paramedics checked Elena's bruised throat while Damian hovered nearby, his presence a silent anchor. Her phone buzzed with a new text, unknown number. "This isn't over. Vivian. The final, venomous thread in the web had yet to be cut." Julian's arrest dominated financial news for days. Reporters camped outside the gates of the glass mansion. Everett Enterprises reeled from the fallout, and Damian disappeared into endless meetings with FBI agents, prosecutors, and shell-shocked executives. Elena was left to piece together her life alone. Her father's health stabilized, though the doctors warned the stress had left deep scars. When Elena visited, Gregory seemed lighter, as if the crushing weight of his secrets had finally been lifted. "I should have come forward years ago," he said once, gripping her hand tightly. "But fear made me a coward." "You were protecting me," Elena whispered. "And in doing so," he said sadly, "I trapped you in a life you never chose." She looked away, her throat tightening. "Damian isn't who we thought he was," she said quietly. Gregory studied her face for a long moment. "You care about him," he said. It wasn't a question, and she didn't deny it. 5 days after Julian's arrest, Elena received an unexpected visitor at the glass mansion. FBI Special Agent Diana Chun stood in the vast foyer, crisp and professional. "We've located James Collins in Guatemala," Agent Chun explained in Damian's office. "But extraction is complicated by diplomatic red tape." "And Vivian Chamberlain?" Elena asked sharply. "She texted me after Julian's arrest." Agent Chun's mouth tightened. "We have been monitoring Miss Chamberlain," she said, "but without hard evidence, we cannot move against her yet." "She is involved," Damian said from the doorway. Elena's heart twisted at the sight of him. Damian was nearly unrecognizable, unshaven, hollow-eyed, his clothes rumpled as if he hadn't slept in days. "Mr. Hale," Agent Chun acknowledged. "We recovered data from Julian's devices," she continued. "It appears Vivian acted primarily as an informant, reporting your activities to Julian and Collins." "Out of jealousy," Damian said bitterly. She never forgave me for choosing Amelia. Agent Chun nodded solemnly. But there is no proof she knew about the murder plot. After she left, silence filled the office thick and uncomfortable. You look terrible, Elena said finally, her voice gentler than she intended. A ghost of a smile touched Damian's lips. Honesty remains your specialty. She hesitated, then asked, When will all this be over? The legal proceedings, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. Years. Probably. I meant us, she said softly. This arrangement. She gestured vaguely to the mansion. The contracts. The weight of everything between them. Julian is arrested. My father is cooperating. The purpose of the marriage contract is fulfilled. Pain flashed across Damian's face before he masked it. Is that what you want? He asked quietly. To end this, before she could answer. His phone rang. He listened, his expression darkening immediately. When are you sure? He barked into the receiver, then hung up. Collins has been found, he said grimly, at the old Everett shipping warehouse. And Vivian, Elena asked, already fearing the answer. Spotted entering the building. Damian said, She's warning him. Or worse, Elena whispered, remembering the text. She promised it wasn't over. Damian grabbed his keys. Stay here, he said. It's safer. I'm coming with you, Elena said firmly. Absolutely not. They manipulated both our lives, she said, stepping into his path. I deserve to see this through. Their eyes locked in silent battle. Finally, Damian cursed under his breath and nodded. Stay behind me. Do exactly as I say. The abandoned warehouse loomed over the waterfront like a ghost from another life. Once, it had been the proud heart of Everett Enterprises' early shipping empire. Now, it stood empty, crumbling, forgotten, and hiding the last, dangerous truths they had yet to face. As they approached the crumbling waterfront warehouse, Damian Hale's security team confirmed 2 heat signatures inside. FBI is 10 minutes out. The head of security reported in a low voice. Local police are securing the perimeter. We wait, Damian said, his jaw tight with control. But Elena Cross, peering into the shadows, caught movement near a side entrance. There, she whispered urgently. A figure emerged distinguished, silver-haired, moving swiftly toward a waiting boat. James Collins. He's escaping, she hissed, before the security team could intercept. Another figure appeared behind him, Vivian Chamberlain, graceful even in crisis. She pressed something into Collins's hand, small and metallic, and vanished into the chaos. Damian broke cover. Collins, he shouted. It's over. Collins spun around. Raising a gun, Vivian's final gift. He fired wildly. Damian's team returned fire, bullets tearing the silence apart. Through the chaos, Elena saw Collins aim directly at Damian. Without thinking, she hurled herself forward, slamming into Damian's side just as Collins pulled the trigger. Fiery pain exploded in her shoulder. She collapsed to the ground, Damian's panicked voice echoing strangely in her ears. Elena, stay with me. Stay with me. The world blurred, sirens, blinding hospital lights, doctors shouting orders, and always Damian's hand in hers grounding her, willing her to fight. Don't leave me, he whispered, voice raw and broken. Not you, too. When she finally woke, Elena found herself in a quiet hospital room, her shoulder aching beneath thick bandages. Damian sat slumped beside her bed, his head bowed in exhaustion. You look worse than before, she croaked, her throat dry but her spirit stubborn. Damian's head snapped up. Relief and something deeper flooded his face. You're awake, he breathed. What happened to Collins? She asked. Dead, Damian said, his voice rough. My team took him down after he shot you. He hesitated, his hand tightening around hers. You almost died saving me, he said, voice cracking. Did they catch Vivian? She asked. Damian shook his head, anger flashing in his eyes. No, she slipped away, but without Collins or Julian. She's powerless now. He brushed her fingers gently. Why? He asked in a whisper. Why would you risk your life for me? The answer came easily, without hesitation. Because losing you, Elena said softly, would hurt more than getting shot. Something inside Damian crumbled the final wall between them. I spent 5 years building prisons for myself, he said, barely audible. Chasing vengeance, becoming someone I hated. Then you arrived stubborn, fearless, maddening, and you tore everything apart. I wasn't part of your plan, she teased weakly. No, he said with a broken smile. You were better than anything I could have planned. He reached up, tracing her cheek with a trembling hand. When I saw you fall, he whispered, when I thought I might lose you, I realized I didn't want to survive another loss, not without you. What happens now? Elena asked softly. Your father's charges will be minimal, Damian said. His testimony helped take down an entire criminal network. And us? She asked. Damian's eyes darkened. The contract, he said slowly, was fulfilled the moment Julian was arrested. You're free. And if I don't want to be free? She asked, voice steady. Hope flickered across his exhausted features. Before he could answer, a nurse entered, bustling to check Elena's vitals. The fragile, precious moment shattered under the weight of reality. By the time they were alone again, Damian's phone was ringing with urgent calls from the FBI. He stood reluctantly, his silhouette framed by the window's pale winter light. Before he left, he turned to her, his voice steady with promise. This isn't over, he said. Not us. Never us. 3 months passed. Autumn surrendered to winter, and the glass mansion's sleek walls blurred under frost and snowfall. The once cold structure now shimmered like something magical, a sanctuary instead of a prison. Elena stood at the windows of the east wing, watching the snowflakes dance in the December wind. She was no longer the woman who had stepped into this mansion with a pen and a desperate heart, and somewhere behind her, in the quiet steps echoing down the hall, she knew Damian was finally learning not just how to survive, but how to live again, with her. Her shoulder had healed, though the doctors warned that physical therapy would continue for months. But the emotional wounds hers and Damian Hale's proved far more complicated. Their relationship hung in a strange limbo. The contract that had once bound them was technically fulfilled. Neither of them had mentioned divorce. Instead, they orbited each other carefully, almost cautiously, building something fragile but undeniably real. Damian had changed in subtle, unexpected ways. The ruthless businessman was still there, sharp as ever, but now glimpses of a different man slipped through the cracks. A man who brought Elena coffee in the mornings, who asked about her paintings, who sometimes almost shyly smiled. The glass mansion changed too. Family photographs now lined the once bare halls. The cold, sterile kitchen bustled with clumsy attempts at cooking. The staff reported, with no small amount of wonder, that Mr. Hale had asked them to think of the mansion not as a workplace, but as a home. Gregory Cross had moved into a rehabilitation center nearby. His testimony had helped dismantle the conspiracy, and his own charges were reduced to a minimum. Julian Carrington faced life imprisonment for murder and financial crimes. James Collins was dead. Vivian Chamberlain had fled the country, but not for long. She was apprehended in Monaco and now faced a 10-year sentence for her role in covering up the crimes. Justice had been served, and yet, Damian seemed restless. He would vanish for hours into his office, take mysterious phone calls, arrange for contractors to work on the third floor without explanation. When Elena asked about it, he only smiled and said, "You will see soon enough." One snowy December evening, she found him waiting for her in the main living room, uncharacteristically nervous. "I want to show you something," he said, holding out his hand. "If you are willing." She took it without hesitation, hand in hand. They climbed the familiar stairs to the third floor, stopping before the door to the north wing. The studio had been cleaned after Julian's arrest, but it had remained locked ever since. Damian hesitated, a flicker of fear crossing his face. "After Amelia died," he said slowly, "I sealed this room, not just her memory, everything she represented: joy, creativity, vulnerability." He met Elena's gaze, the weight of the past between them. "I thought locking away the pain would make me strong," he whispered. "I was wrong." He unlocked the door. The room was transformed. Gone was the dusty shrine to a life lost. In its place was a bright, open studio, flooded with natural light pouring through new skylights. Two distinct spaces had been created. One side carefully preserved Amelia's paintings, honoring her talent and spirit. The other side was new fresh canvases, easels, brushes waiting. "You have been working on this all month," Elena realized, her voice catching. Damian nodded. "Healing doesn't mean forgetting," he said. "Amelia deserves to be remembered, not hidden. And you deserve more than a consolation prize." He led her to a side door she had not noticed before. It opened into a glass-enclosed walkway, connecting the studio to a new structure built overlooking the winter gardens. Inside, the space gleamed polished floors, high ceilings, and walls waiting to be filled. "For your work," Damian said quietly, "and for young artists from the community programs you used to support." He smiled, a true, unguarded smile. "The Elena Cross Gallery will open this spring." Tears welled in Elena's eyes. "You remembered everything," she whispered. "I remember everything you have ever told me," he said, taking her hands, "especially that everyone deserves a second chance." They stood together in a hush of falling snow. The world outside hushed and shimmering beyond the glass. "Our contract is fulfilled," Damian said at last, voice low. "You are free to leave whenever you wish." But for the first time, Elena realized freedom no longer meant walking away. It meant choosing where she truly belonged. "Your father's medical care is guaranteed," Damian Hale said quietly, "and I have established a trust for your financial independence." Elena Cross stared at him, searching his face. "Is that what you want?" she asked softly. "For me to leave?" Damian's throat worked as he struggled to speak. "What I want," he said at last, his voice rough. "What I want hasn't mattered for 5 years. I've been suspended, not living, not dead." He took a shaky breath. "And then you came along, this inconvenient arrangement that became something I never expected." He led her back toward the displayed paintings, stopping before one particular canvas, a self-portrait of Amelia. Her painted eyes sparkled with intelligence and warmth. "Forever young, forever out of reach. She would have liked you," Damian said softly. "She believed in second chances, too." "And you?" Elena asked gently. "Do you believe in second chances?" Damian turned fully to face her. "I am trying," he said simply, his voice roughened. "These past months watching you heal, seeing you refuse to be broken, forced me to look at who I have become, and I don't want to be that man anymore." "Who do you want to be?" she asked. "Someone worthy of you," he said. someone who builds rather than destroys, someone who loves without fear. The word love hung between them, acknowledged at last. "When you took that bullet for me," Damian said, his voice breaking, "I realized something I had been too afraid to admit. Life without you would mean going back to that emptiness I lived in for so long, and I can't go back there. I won't." From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet case, not a jewelry box but a key case. He opened it to reveal a slender key, a sapphire embedded in its handle. "This isn't just a key," Elena whispered. Confused, Damian smiled. "No, it's yours." He placed it gently in her hand. "The key to this house, to the gallery, to everything I have." He looked into her eyes, all pretense stripped away. No contracts, no legal obligations, just one question. He knelt before her, holding the key between them. "Elena Cross," he said, his voice trembling, "would you tear up the past with me and start again, not as a transaction, but as two people who found each other against every odd? Are you asking me to marry you?" she asked, tears in her eyes. "For real this time," he said, smiling softly. "I'm asking for the chance to build a life, a real life with you." She looked down at him, this man who had once been all walls and armor, and now offered nothing but his true, wounded heart. Still the same, yet different in all the ways that mattered. "On one condition," she said, her voice steady. "Anything," he whispered. "No more walls," Elena said. "No more locked rooms, no more hiding, complete transparency. Like this ridiculous glass house you built." A real smile, wide and boyish, broke across Damian's face. "Exactly like that," he promised. He rose and pulled her gently into his arms. Their first kiss was tentative, a question asked and answered. The second was surer. The third was a vow. Outside, snow drifted in slow spirals across the glass mansion. Inside, something once broken and hidden had finally been set free, because sometimes the most unlikely beginnings lead to the most perfect endings, because kindness could transform even the most wounded hearts, because love, once given a chance to breathe, could shatter even the strongest defenses, and because sometimes the greatest contracts are not written on paper, but on two hearts wide open, finally ready to choose each other, forever. And so, inside a mansion of glass, two hearts that had once been locked behind walls of fear and regret chose something different. They chose trust. They chose forgiveness. They chose love, fragile, imperfect, and yet stronger than any contract ever signed, because sometimes the greatest promises are not written on paper, but carved into the spaces between two souls brave enough to begin again. If this story touched your heart, if it made you believe even just for a moment that healing is possible, and that love can find us in the most unexpected ways, please like this video, share it with someone who might need a little hope today, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that shine light into the darkest corners. Thank you for being here. The next chapter is always just beginning.